bad. Boring, out of focus. I don't know what's going on there. Too much saturation, not enough saturation. No, 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 no. No doubt getting critique on your images can be quite daunting. It can also be a nightmare, depending on the person that's giving you the feedback. In the video today, I'm going to run through some submitted images by 2 photographers. It's my hope that the critiques here are going to help you in your photography journey and give you some inspiration. All right, let's take a look. Okay, this first selection of images are by Fiona Campbell. Fiona is someone who I've kind of mentored over the last 4 or 5 years. That's been online, and then also she's come out to NZ to join a workshop in the past. So it's been a real pleasure to watch Fiona's photography just soar over the years, and she's someone that's really taken on board a lot of the advice that I've given her. So it's been incredibly rewarding to see that progression and just see her flourish with her photography and enjoying that whole process. The images here, there's some absolute beauties, and then there's a few little refinements and basically tweaks I would make to some of them. I've shortlisted about 4 that we'll specifically talk about, but here's the rest of the images that she's put in, and there's just some absolutely beautiful work here, some really great stuff. And just at the bottom of the pile, I've selected 4 that we're going to talk about, and we're going to begin those right here. We have this aurora image, the waterfall scene, this castle, and then this epic one there. I'm going to start off with this aurora frame. I'm going to right click and open this up in Camera Raw. The main thing that jumps out at me on this frame, there's 2 factors. Number 1, the composition is very tricky because we have 2 incredibly strong focal points. The aurora is one of them. This large mountain is the other. And even on the aurora side of things, the bridge is obviously quite strong. So compositionally, this is a tricky one, and that's just unfortunate that the aurora basically went off to the left of the mountain. So it's made the composition tricky. Aside from that, and I guess in that regard, you could maybe have composed the mountain out of the frame to really just lead the eye to the aurora and the bridge, potentially. Obviously, the mountain's a great subject, but we'll leave that in for now. I guess in theory, you could say that counterbalances things, you know, having the aurora on the left, mountain on the right, bridge in the center. So maybe it works for some people. The main part though that's jumping out for me, it's the warm hues that we have down in the lower part of the frame. It's basically orange down here, orange rocks, golden yellows. It looks like there was probably some moonlight hitting the landscape, and then the camera's white balance has done that. Look at the difference. So I think if we cool things down, and this is a global adjustment, it's neutralized all those warm hues. So I've brought the global temperature down -20. Let's zoom in here and do before and after. That's the original. So I think it looks much nicer having those warm hues dialed back. The aurora reflected in the river is fantastic. That breaks up all those dark tones. So I'd get a brush and then potentially just lift that out further with the exposure, some whites, even back here, just all that water in general. Bring those whites up. You can see now we just got some more luminosity in there. And then potentially for the top part of the sky, you could just use a brush for this, maybe dehazing, bring the blacks down slightly. And what I'm doing is just going to darken the edge so the eye really gets drawn down into that centralized part, even more contrast on the edge there, like so, just to push the eye through where we essentially wanted to go, which is going to be where that bridge is. But let's just have a before and after. So that's the original, and then that's afterwards. So I'm just trying to shift the attention down into that lower portion. If you don't want the sky cooled down as much, because a lot of the cooling was more about the river and the bridge, you could simply just bring that back with a brush, bring the temperature back up, and then warm that top section if you wanted to, and then it won't be as blue and as cool. But that was the main thing that jumped out at me here. Let's get rid of those warm hues down the lower part, and let's bring out some of that luminosity down in the river. Moving on to one of the other frames, this scene now with the waterfall. What I like about this composition is the play around the centralized zone. The waterfall is guiding to the left of center, and then the log here is guiding the eye to the right of center. So we have a nice counterbalance happening. If anything though, what's screaming out at me in this one is the large expanse down this lower left. If you look at how much of the frame this is taking up, this whole left-hand corner, almost about 25% of the entire image, and there's just really not too much going on there. To me, it's a bit of a void. Now, up in the top right-hand corner, we have these trees which are curving us in towards the fall, and then even on the left-hand side, there's enough points of interest here with that tree and then the mosses and the greens that it just really balances out the waterfall nicely, which is in that centralized area. Now, of course, in the foreground, we have the log, which leads us through. And then there's a nice progression of size here with the large stone in this lower right. And then it just kind of leads us through this area, that big to small diminishing perspective. So in regards to that lower corner, all we can do now is crop. We're not in the field anymore. So I'm wondering, would it look more effective if it was tighter like this and then realigning that waterfall still in that centralized zone? But this time, instead of having the waterfall more or less flowing left of center, I'm wondering, can it work effectively having it flow from the right of center, ending in the centralized zone, somewhere like that potentially? It's hard because we already have the log where it's been positioned. Ideally, if I was here right now, I'd take a large step to the right, and that would make this log commence in that lower corner and then lead us into that waterfall. But I think maybe a tighter crop, even if we go to the original flow, which was more like that, I'm believing it might be more effective not having that large space in the lower corner. If we reintroduce it, you'll probably see more dramatically the effect that it was having on my eye, just that large space down the bottom. Another thing could be a 16:9 ratio. That could also work quite well. And honestly, that's probably the better ratio in my opinion. The water has some interesting hues. These are obviously the tannins here from the rain going through the forest. I wonder though if we cooled this one down a touch as well, maybe dial that into the green more, get that off the magenta, just to try and neutralize that color slightly. Before, after. Not a huge deal either way as far as the color goes, but again, if we just zoom in on the water, that's after, that's before. So it's quite warm, quite brown, mostly from the tannins, but a little bit of an adjustment there. You could also jump into the grading and have it play at maybe cooling down those midtones, which will affect the water and the greens, maybe complement the forest better, having the blue and green. That's the original, and then that's post, and obviously we have the crop applied as well. This one jumps out straight away because of the contrast and the beautiful colors. I like the positioning of having the castle back there. We've got the full reflection, which is important, so it hasn't been cropped out at all and cut off. I like the curve of the shoreline as it leads the eye around the frame. And I like the concept of the framing, the natural frame with the tree, especially this portion where there's complete separation from the cloud here. That little gap there is critical, getting that separation. Where there is not so much separation, sorry Fiona, but it's just killing me that we couldn't, it's close, but I wish, and it seems minor, but it would make a big difference if this separation, if we had a separation through there, and potentially if that whole leaf was finishing more or less where it's beginning, about here, having then that clear pathway of water, why would that be effective? It would help accentuate the flow and lead to the castle. Because at the moment, because it ends there, it's blocked that hint of luminosity. The luminosity, the light is in the water, nowhere else. So now the luminosity basically stops and we have that small break. Now I think if you just had that separation there, it would have helped pull the eye all the way around. It's not huge, but it's just those little attentions to detail that can really go a long way. Otherwise, this one's quite beautiful. It is very low light. It is tempting to maybe raise up some of the details, maybe about here, and potentially in this background area. It looks like you've already done some work anyway. You've done quite a good job. I'm just wondering, could you have gone a touch brighter just to bring the eye into that castle? And also cooling down, I think, the shadows and the midtones, because there's already a nice cool tone in there. Jumping in the grading, cooling this down slightly. Let's go a little more on that, and then we'll cool the shadows partially. I think the blues really work well. More blue, more cooler tones, and therefore where we have the warm hues in that background, they seem more pronounced now. probably gone overboard with that. Let's just dial that back. Could warm that up back there. Let's just do a before and after. Before, after. No right or wrong. I'd probably maybe dial it back a little bit, what I did. But yeah, with the composition, so close to getting that part in. I think it would have been really effective. Otherwise, overall, I wouldn't really change anything. It's still worth keeping this image. It's a great image with the comp, the natural frame, obviously the beautiful light. Just keep in mind those little things. Now, the last one, I wanted to look at this one here, because to me, this one, when I'm looking at it in the thumbnail and now pulling it up, there's hardly anything I would change. So I wanted to bring this one up as basically a thumbs up and say, well done. I love here the depth. We have a beautiful perspective here with the big close details progressively leading us through. And then the main subject, the mountains, the light, everything's in this centralized zone. So we're harmonized within our frame. No doubt an epic sky with some cirrus clouds getting lit up, well timed with the light hitting everything. I love the light just skimming the water. That's critical there. Fantastic image. We've lost a lot of detail in this back midground area. So potentially maybe some further work bringing up details. So I've just lifted shadows, whites, blacks, trying to bring all this up. The trick would be revealing enough detail so we can see what's going on, but we need to make sure it looks realistic. So if we're going to be brighter there, realistically, we would have to be brighter almost everywhere back there just to match the light. So now I've got exposure up, and I'm just wondering if we just blasted more light in general. I wouldn't have minded an image without the sunstar as well, just as it was a glow, or you know, just skimming the water. It's very tricky, but sometimes the sunstars, yeah, I don't know. I go back and forward with some sunstars. Sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't. Anyway, it's overall, this is a fantastic image. I'm just wondering if we did that a bit more light, glowing back there. The top part of the sky, shadows and blacks, I like darkening them, but in this case, maybe it's a little too dark, so I'm just softening all that up. Probably gone way too far now, so we'll dial that back a little. And last, some more dodging, bring the whites up just on the water in this midground, just to get some tonal separation in there like that. Before, after, just lifting out some more of those tones, just a rough adjustment I would make. Take my time though, but that gives you a rough idea. Overall though, fantastic images. All the images, obviously beautiful photography, really well done. It's great, again, to see all that progression and diversity in the work. And hopefully those critiques there have given you some food for thought, as well as everyone else watching along. To finish up, we're going to look at some of Jamil's photography. Some beautiful images here from Italy, New Zealand, Switzerland, and I'll give a quick run through on some of the work that he submitted. I did a private session with Jamil and gave him some direct feedback on all of the images. And I did ask him if he'd mind if we put some on YouTube here, and he was fine with that. So thank you, Jamil, mate, for letting us share some of the stuff that we spoke about earlier. So I have shortlisted a couple of these that we are going to specifically talk about. There was a little bit of a common thread compositionally, no doubt some beautiful photography. But one of the things that was jumping out at me, and I might open this one, when we're using our wide angles in landscape photography, it's a beautiful way to add depth and layering and incorporate, you know, good foreground, lead the eye through to the background. Sometimes though, we can get in a habit of, and I've done this so many times myself, just overusing the wide and shooting wide way too often, when in reality a tighter focal length might have been much better. And I'm even saying maybe instead of 14 you should have been 20. Just those 5-6 mils can really go a long way, instead of always being on the extreme wide end of things. This image here though, you know, the lens is a 14 to 24. Jamil has shot at 24, so he's, you know, use the longer end of his lens, but I think this frame would have been way more effective being 35, maybe even 50 mil, so just a whole new lens altogether, instead of being on the wide angle. And the reason is the background to me is epic. We've got the valley framing left and right, predominant subject matter in the middle with good light. The foreground, there's a few dead leaves in here, which isn't great obviously, but just the whole lower part, there's just nothing really going on. And 50% of this image is foreground. And when we look there, there's nothing really that appealing. The best stuff is right in the back. So in theory, I think compositionally, it might have been way stronger, and I'll just have to change the ratio for the sake of the demonstration. But if the percentage of foreground was more like this, just maybe that lower 25 to 30%, bang, look at the impact now. We've got the big mountain in the frame, we have the valley framing, we still have foreground for depth, we've got all the layering, that really works effectively. So if he was able to compress further 35 to 50 mil, I think we would have had a lot more impact. You can see that's the original shot there, so a lot of foreground, a little bit of a difference there, and the composition would have went a long way. And I had a very similar amount of feedback for this image. I like the concept with getting the layering of the ice in the foreground, but all I'm really looking at is that epic scenario in the background where we have a complete reflection. We still have all the ice, but the framing and everything, boom, look at that frame. Strong subject matter in the middle. We have the leading lines and balance coming down from the edges. We've got all the light and reflection back there, and we still have great ice details in the foreground, all creating a nice little natural frame. I think that would have been a fantastic comp. This one has been captured at 14 mil, so I think definitely going 24 or even 35 again, horizontally, not vertically, would have been a great way to do it justice instead of just going for the vertical orientation and on the wider end. Really, I think the best stuff is back here. And he may have a raw file and a composition from that background anyway. So I'm only judging this on this one particular image. And again, I'm just speaking from experience as well. I've done this so many times myself, and then I've looked back later and just thought, what was I thinking? This one, this is a beautiful image, you know. Whenever you have a sky like that, and if you can get reflections, just fantastic. He's got the separation over here with the rocks, so that's really nice. The reflections are not getting obstructed or cut off. The main feedback I had for this one was the lower left just feels like a void because we have such a strong element in that lower right-hand corner. I think for this one, similar to Fiona's, if we just go for a 16:9 tighter frame, somewhere around here, then bang, it's just going to do justice to that background, pull it all in, and we don't have that distraction in that lower left. We'll go back to the original, and obviously it's still beautiful, but my eye just keeps getting pulled down to that lower left-hand corner. This one was one of my favorites, and the only difference I really would do here was a slight change in the processing to bring out all that epic atmosphere and drama in the background. I also think a slightly tighter comp here, compositionally, just getting rid of some of that foreground. In this case, even a 1-to-1, like a square, not that I personally really shoot squares, but if we pull this up, you'll see what I mean, how the eye just really flows, boom, to the mountain scene, or even a 4:5, giving us a tiny bit more in the frame. Now, I always just shoot 2 to 3 personally, but I'm only doing this now because we don't have the choice to change the actual composition. So all we can do is really tweak it with our cropping and the ratio. So there we go, 4:5. Now we're getting that flow. But with the processing, I was thinking he could have really dramatized and darkened down the sky, because I can see there's a lot of tones up there, just like that. Darker edges, which is going to accentuate that mid-zone. Could also have gone a monochrome, potentially not black and white would be okay as well, but even cooling it down and then just reduce the vibrance and saturation. Looks like a black and white. Now we can really go heavy on the contrast. So a bit more contrast in general, darken the edges further. Can get away with a lot more in these monochromes and black and whites, especially on this dramatic stuff. And let's go a little bit more overboard just to really accentuate what I'm talking about. Then in the centralized area, we could bring up a few whites for the light, make sure the eye punches in on that zone. Some whites on the river there, like that. So we'll go before, after, really just, boom, draw the eye into that big epic scene in the background. This one will be an easy change, you know, a very slight crop, and then maybe a monochrome black and white conversion. But overall, some fantastic photography. And thank you again, mate, for reaching out. Like, look at these ones, just epic stuff going on. And some of them just needed, in my opinion, the smallest amount of refinement to bring out the best in them. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it and you picked up a few tips for your own photography. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And of course, this is all subjective, right? We all have different eyes and different preferences. So this is just some generalized feedback, and it's a pleasure to be able to do this. So I really appreciate it, and appreciate you viewing the channel. Look forward to sharing some more videos soon. Cheers.